Welcome to the Talent Optimization Podcast, the go-to podcast for CEOs and HR professionals wanting to bridge the gap between the strategy and tactical implementation of talent optimization within their organizations. Through interviews, predictive index, and personal experience, your host, Tracy Shirk, helps you discover the facets of talent optimization from both a CEO and HR perspective to truly create the dream team for your organization. Are you ready? Let's get started.
Well, welcome back to Talent Optimization. My name is Tracy Shirk, and I am joined today with Dr. Alicia Schatteman. And Dr. Schatteman comes to us from Northern Illinois University, and she is responsible for the nonprofits and the nonprofit program there. And I have to say, I am so excited to have Dr. Schatteman on the show today because she was one of my professors when I received my MPA. So with that, we are chatting today about, the power of pause and how we really think about debrief and plan as we end 2021 and all the crazy that the last 2 years have been, and really look at where do we go from here for the next year. Dr. Schatteman, welcome.
Thank you so much, Tracy. And you can call me Alicia. I'm no longer grading your papers or.
I know. I wasn't sure. I've been calling you Alicia all morning. All right.
Exactly. Only if you're in the right classroom, you have to call me Dr. Schatteman.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Again, we're building rapport, right? So for those of you that have listened in to, our employee and teamwork quadrant, right? How do you want to be treated and how do you want to treat others to create that relationship? So there's a quick debrief.
There you go. Making connections already.
Absolutely. So I'm super curious. What are you seeing specifically in the nonprofit sector with, COVID maybe sort of kind of coming to a close or not? We've got all these variants floating out there. What are you seeing with staffing and just are people's batteries full? Are they depleted? What can we look at and reflect on to really set ourselves up for success going forward?
I'd like to think we've turned a corner with COVID. I hate to say it's ending, who knows? But I think we've turned a corner from real crisis into whatever this period is. They're still providing services. They're still meeting the community needs and meeting their mission. And now they have a little bit more bandwidth to figure out, what do we do with staffing? Are we looking at leadership changes? I think some of our executive directors are very tired. They're a little war weary over the last year of trying to figure out how are we going to maintain services or in some cases increase our services and do that remotely in a safe way and then bring people back in a safe way. So I think they're weary and tired. So they're thinking about leadership changes on the top end. And then they're also thinking about retention and recruitment at the bottom end of figuring out it's a tight labor market. So how do we recruit people that we need to fill those services, to actually deliver those services, knowing that they can get those lower level jobs in many different places right now. And there's lots of opportunities. So on both ends, I think they're seeing it. And boards really are thinking, I think over the last year, they did put a pause on planning because who could even think about planning beyond 2021? So I think now that some of them have reached out and to say that they are interested in planning, looking at a year or two, maybe 3 years out, what does that mean? So there are some short-term pressures. And now I think they're starting to think about some longer-term leadership challenges.
Yeah, absolutely. So how do we design that dream team for our organization, knowing that our strategy, hopefully now that we're stabilized, is changing in order to do that? And knowing the tight labor market we're in, can we actually address some of the performance challenges that we've been having in order to move some things forward? I was talking with a client yesterday who's a nonprofit client who has lots of grant funding. And as we know, with grant funding, it comes and goes. And when we're in times like this, the grant funding will say, hey, it's being cut off on this date. Then a week before it's supposed to be cut off. Oh, just kidding. We're going to give it to you for another 4 months. So we have these expansions and contractions of the labor market. And as nonprofit leaders, how do we deal with that in a way that doesn't leave folks burned out?
Yeah, I think many nonprofits are looking at their labor force. So first, they're looking at their labor force. Do they all need to be back in person? How many people are coming back in person? And what does that mean for the financial efficiency of the organization? Maybe it's a reduction in leasing space. Maybe it's letting go of a building they own to lease a smaller space. I mean, those are some things certainly that they're definitely talking about right now, is who's coming back and what does that even look like. But then using a flexible workforce, so maybe using contractual or interns that has a shorter time period, so you're not making a commitment, for a full-time employee and all the benefits that might come with that. So thinking through their flexible kind of model of what that looks like. I know a number of human service organizations, all of their, say, counseling staff have gone to contractual workers. So they can hire them and be a little bit more flexible depending on demand versus kind of the full-time employee model. So I think all of those models are on the table. It's going to take some creative thinking on the boards to think through, will this actually save us dollars and or allow us to better serve our mission? And those are tough to balance. Efficiency and effectiveness, you learn that in the MPA program. Those are things to definitely balance back and forth. Can we deliver our programs and services well and be financially efficient? And those are sometimes at odds. And then over the last several years, things like equity have popped in, and how does that influence our decision making as well?
Absolutely. And I think as we kind of look backwards and debrief on what have we done over the last 2 years, not only have we have COVID, but we're really paying close attention to the diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that brings things on the table, such as your employee handbook. Do you have bias or, institutional racism built into that? And guess what? These are never comfortable conversations, right?
Yeah. I know I had a conversation with a nonprofit a while ago on offering health benefits, and they're very small, 3 to 6 staff or whatever. They've never offered medical benefits. And that really excludes people like single parents or single individuals that don't have a spouse or partner that has medical benefits. So you're building in bias into who can actually work for you. That's problematic. And maybe there's other ways to address that. And certainly some of them have. They've given, some extra pay so that they could purchase individual plans, whatever that looks like. But those are hard conversations to have when it's a model that they've used relatively successfully for maybe even decades, that, we just don't offer medical benefits. So that means everyone here has to have medical benefits a different way.
Right.
Not be the employee that covers the family, whatever. So yeah, that's definitely problematic. And I think those are some things they're looking at. The other thing I think they're really paying close attention is to salaries and not just non-monetary, but also monetary benefits, making sure that you're in line with the market and the experience that you want. We're also pushing organizations to actually tell us what the salary range is. Don't make it a hidden secret.
Right.
You're dissuading people from applying if you don't actually tell them, by the way, we want you to work, 40 hours a week at a high level job, and we can only afford to pay you $25,000. People should know that before they apply, or vice versa, that maybe it would be more attractive to people if you actually disclose what the salary range is. So salary disclosure is certainly a big thing. And then having market value rates that not only compensate for the job position, but also the experience and training that you're asking for. If you're asking for a graduate degree, in the nonprofit world, it wasn't that long ago where we didn't have degrees in nonprofit anything. You got a business degree, you got a political science degree, you got a public administration degree, or you found your way into an organization and just kind of stayed there and built up the experience to become eventually an ED. That's no longer the case. We have undergraduate, graduate, PhD programs in nonprofit management studies, philanthropy, all of those things. So there's more credentials and more education out there. Are you attracting those individuals? If you're looking at replacing especially a long-serving ED, you'll be surprised at what those salaries, what they can make, because they do have that background in education, which they just didn't have before.
Right. And when you look at them coming in with that background in education, I think so often we're looking at outputs versus outcomes, something I think I tore a page out of your book, Alicia. It's like, what is the output? Okay, the output is that we created this program, but the outcome is what? We're looking to increase the quality of an individual's life. And I think when it needs to be more specific than that. So
Yeah.
But when we look at that, we're also looking at that with our staff. And the nonprofits that we work with so often are saying, hey, Tracy, we have no idea what an HR program looks like that really engages our staff so that they can be fulfilled in the work that they're doing, that they're making a living wage, meaning we're going to keep them for a long period of time, and that they understand what is the talent pathway for me to actually move to the different levels inside of the organization. And because that, when we look at the moving inside of the organization, that institutional knowledge is key for the organization to be successful. So there are programs to make that happen, but that's something that individual with an education comes in can lay that out really quickly and easily.
Yeah, you bring up a good point around, basically mobility within these organizations. The vast majority of nonprofits are very, very small.
Right.
So if you want to be the marketing director, of an organization, likely you're going to have to move to a bigger organization. There's no other place for you to go. There's one person who does that job in your organization. So there's just normal transition in the nonprofit sector because of the size issue. If you're in a certain size organization, the only way career advancement is outside. And it creates that, that institutional memory loss every time. So you could have a very young staff, if you're small, who are going to stay there for 2 or 3 years, and then move on. And that's just the reality, unless, you're constantly focusing on growth, which isn't necessarily always warranted or needed, that every organization needs to grow.
Right. And I think that creativity, I think back to my nonprofit days, and I had an executive director that was trying so hard to keep me. And she took my HR manager role and turned it into director of human relations. And I was now responsible for all the fund development, all the marketing, and HR inside of an organization.
We're really good at job titles. We're very, very good at job titles in the nonprofit world. Actually, somebody just emailed me about that. Do job titles kind of matter? And I said, well, there's 2 ways to look at it. We can't give you a raise, but we'll give you a very significant job title. So we're going to make you vice president of whatever, or executive, whatever. We're going to do the job title thing. But job titles do matter. It matters, for the internally, it matters, but also matters to the external world of what are you responsible for? What kinds of things are you supposed to do? And so if that job description is just like comma, 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 and you're just doing all those things, you're like, and you're really not doing all those things, right? I mean, right. You can't do all of those things. So it's a signal to the external world as how much they value the employees, and also who's going to be attracted into that next, when that becomes an opening. So if you have all the commas after your name, you're like, oh, I'm not, I can't do all of that with no staff or no extra resources. So who are you going to attract? I think that's problematic for nonprofits.
Yeah, I think that job titles can be problematic. One of the things that she did incredibly well, though, is she saw strengths in me that I didn't see in myself. And so, her saying, hey, Tracy, you have an amazing way of connecting with people and enrolling them in our mission. I think fund development would be a great stretch opportunity. I'm like, what are you talking about? My entire career has been in HR. You want me to go
relations. Yeah.
Yeah. You want me to go raise $2 million for whatever? I'm like, all right. And we did it. Right. Yeah, but that's where kind of those talent pathways. And hey, if you're listening in going, how do I keep these key folks? That may be something to look at. But I think that the flip side of this is if you are in that executive director role going, I'm out, right? Yeah. I'm crispy. I'm out. I'm kind of biding my time here, but how do I best set my organization up for success as I exit? What are your thoughts on that?
So I've seen a couple of transitions that I thought were done really, really well, and others that have struggled, particularly with founders. Mm-hmm. So, executive directors that created the nonprofit, basically made it their career, stayed for 20, 30 years, and they have a very hard time leaving. So flippantly, I'll say you need to go to Arizona for 2 years and then come back. Like you need to go somewhere so you're not watching it, right? It's kind of like moving in beside your kids who live next door. Like it's really, really hard to watch it. You can't be that close to it because the organization really won't stand on its own 2 feet if you remain that close to it and that engaged. So I've seen that kind of be a little problematic. Where I've seen really good transitions is having a plan, really thinking through what is this transition going to be like? What does the organization stand to lose as I exit? And a lot of that is usually relationships. So what kinds of things can I make sure are in place before I leave? Let people know what you're doing. Like communicate. That you have one executive director here announced that she was going to leave in 9 months. So the organization, they sent that out. The community knows. The organization is planning for it. They said they were going to basically transition somebody internal. There's going to be a transition period where they're going to basically co-direct. And then by the end of the 9 months, then this executive director will be retiring. So that is like, wow. I mean, that hardly ever happens. That's if you have the time and you want to be that transparent with the process. I think that works really, really well for a heavily community embedded kind of organization. Other founders or other executive directors, they want to still stay engaged, but they don't want to be the person in charge anymore. So they're like, oh, I'm going to move to the board. Generally a bad idea. Generally. Doesn't mean it doesn't work. It's just generally a bad idea. Because when you've been on the other side of the table, you have inside knowledge of how things work and how they're supposed to work and your processes and systems. And you will get disgruntled if those things aren't, followed in subsequent years. So generally I say, if you're an ED, like exit stage left, don't try to transition on the board right away. Because people on the board know you in a different capacity. And so they'll say, well, you know how this worked. How did it work? And then every decision, basically, you become a driver again, even though you're not in that official capacity. So those are kind of some of the transitional things that I've seen. It takes a very strong, generally a board chair, a board president, kind of oversee the process because the board is the one that's going to be around during that transition and managing that. If you have board members who have been through a transition in the past, or you need board members who have that experience, recruit them now, get them on the board, people who have that experience of handling this in the past and kind of know the minefields of that transitional period. I mean, other organizations, it could send you more into a crisis of the executive director, they could be ill, they could have passed away. I mean, all of those kinds of things, but have an idea of, in the event of, what would we do? Do we have somebody internally that we've talked to that we're thinking could be our next leader? Have we had those discussions? Are they interested? Don't automatically assume that we need to go external. Have those conversations internal first, and then they may tell you, yeah, absolutely, I'm ready, I'm interested, or no way, like I'm in a place in my life where I'm comfortable in my role. I think you need to look externally, but start with your internal conversations first.
What I love about what you just said was communication is key. We're going to build trust through the process. But the other thing is with that communication, if we're not having those conversations with our high potentials that we want to move into these higher level roles, they may be looking externally and we don't know it. So make sure you're having those conversations, because I see so often, not just in nonprofit organizations, but with leaders inside of organizations, they just think everybody knows and that so-and-so is going to step into this position and that person has no idea that their name's on the docket for that. And guess what? They've already checked out 50% because they're searching for a job. Had they known, they could have been groomed and been 100% engaged with your organization. So I love how you just laid that out.
Thanks.
So as we start to wrap up, kind of this debrief, looking forward, the planning that comes with it, we always like to end with, what is one key takeaway that you have for your executive directors listening in?
I think they need to be, most of them really need to have a lot of appreciation for the work that they do on a day-to-day basis. They chose a career knowing they were not going to be millionaires and own a yacht and be able to travel to Europe every summer. I mean, they've taken significant pay cuts, probably with their education and training. They could have gone and done other things. So they are already monetarily committing themselves and their families to a lower earning over their lifetime. Just by saying, I'm going to be a leader in the nonprofit sector, you do that. And I don't think we hold up those leaders as much as we do in other industries and in other worlds. So I think our executive directors needed just a ton of congratulations, one, for doing that and being able to hold these organizations together over this last year and a half. There is no playbook for what we've just been through and what we're still in. They had to rely on their own resources, their own background and experience as much as they could, and their boards. And many boards, I think, are on autopilot, or were on autopilot before COVID. And if anything, there's been a way more board engagement during this last year and a half because these leaders needed people to say, what do you think we should do? I'm not sure. What do you think is the best course of action? So it's really caused a lot of our boards to be more engaged, which is great. I hope that continues after when we've maybe started to level out a bit.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. And what about for HR leaders? And granted, HR leaders and nonprofits, you have to be a pretty decent sized nonprofit for that. But what would you say for HR leaders in nonprofits or those that are really in that HR role?
They have a tough job because we're in a very tight labor market. We are trying to recruit young people into the sector. So our degree here at Northern is trying to work with students to say there's definitely a career path here for you, depending on what your interest is. You have lots of opportunities. So work with your local community colleges and universities and think about what programs that they have you can connect with, whether that's the marketing department, accounting, nonprofit studies, whatever it happens to be. We have a lot of young people who want to make a difference in their lives and in their communities where they come from. So don't overlook kind of the individuals that may or may not have expressed, yes, I want to come work for, your particular organization, but they are passionate. If you can connect it to their mission, to the mission and how you're going to improve communities, you will attract those younger individuals. And then same thing on the other end is be open and transparent with people. What can you offer? Not just salaries and benefits, but also just community and the unpaid benefits that you have. Don't discount that. That's why a lot of people get into the sector. It's for that sense of purpose when they go home at night that they know they've made a difference. So I think they have a lot of things that they can bring, that individuals really want to bring to the sector.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that and for joining us today to chat a little bit about what does this look like as we close out 2021 and head into 2022. So if you are interested in learning more about Alicia and the work that she does, we will have her LinkedIn profile and information to the NGO studies and Northern Illinois University in our show notes. Also, if you're listening in going, I have no idea how to start to create an HR plan in my organization, we have an amazing tool, and that's our Talent Optimization Foundation membership program, which gives you access to certified HR professionals twice a month, along with live webinars where we will go through actually how to lay out these types of programs inside of your organization. And that information is also in our show notes. So thanks so much for joining us and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Talent Optimization Podcast. You'll find more tools and resources for CEOs and HR professionals looking to bridge the strategies versus implementation gap of talent optimization at elevatedtalentconsulting.com. We've also created a free, valuable resource for you to begin bridging the gap called the Talent Optimization Foundation Membership Program. You can access it for free at elevatedtalentconsulting.com/foundation. Be sure to tune in next week for another episode to learn more about talent optimization and creating a dream team for your organization.